Guys, are you there? It's me, the sword.
Hello?
I'm trapped in here.
Whoa, Jimmy?
Smells like mothballs and dirty socks.
How'd you get into a USB sword?
My wife and I got into a heavy fight. She's technologically competent, and I'm not.
Happens to the best of us.
Oh, I'm free.
I'm back. Hey guys,
What's up?
Here we go.
here we go. Videogame Sommelier.
Mm,
Cheers. Cheers,
Yep.
cheers.
cheers to all y'all.
My father got me a little gift set of bullet
Nice.
bourbon that came with those mugs, and so apparently now we are doing product placement.
Woo!
Sorry about that.
Brought to you by clear glasses from the grocery store filled with like room temperature water.
That's incredible.
I feel like you need to break it now. Like, I feel like that's just like the payoff of that. Yeah.
I know.
Another
round.
Hear that, Nick Cage?
Yeah. Oh Lord. Here we go.
Transistor.
Transistor. So this time we brought a trailer. Should we just open with the trailer and just
Roll the
kinda
trailer.
throw people
So
in?
let's get people salivating over this, man. Let's roll it.
It's a good one.
All right. So here's what we're about to be talking about.
When you speak, I hear silence. Every word a defiance. I can hear, oh, I can hear. Think I'll go where it suits me. Moving now to a country with everyone, oh, everyone. Before we all become one. You'll become.
Great show, everybody. This was a wrap.
2014. I feel like we're those people that like play games, 6 years after they come out.
Exactly.
Guys heard about this game on Nintendo 64?
Well, it's new to me, man.
The cake is a lie.
Did you hear the big twist?
But like so many of these games that we don't get a chance to play on here, the music and visuals are so important. And this one felt especially important. Ryan, before the show, you were saying it's like playing a music video, and it totally feels that way. So I was very intent on just at least showing a glimpse of this game that hopefully anyone who watches this will get a chance to play that we're going to start chatting about.
Whew, man, this game. So I did play it in 2014 when it came out. I was a huge fan of Bastion, and that game, for anyone who's played it, is just an indie classic from its day, and features the vocal the vocal skills of, what is his name, Logan Cunningham. He's hilarious. And so he's actually reprised roles in every Supergiant game that's come out since. Who's the Pixar guy that keeps getting repeated?
Ham.
Yeah.
He's the guy who plays Ham. I was literally going to say that.
Like Rasberger, right?
Yeah. Yes, he's like that guy for Pixar. But
Yeah.
he plays the voice of the sword. And unlike Bastion, where he plays this like drawling Western narrator, cracking wise at your shenanigans you pull in that game. In this game, he plays a very earnest man who gets impaled in the opening scene of the game, and now lives inside of this sword that you wield around as you as you go through the game. And what I found really interesting about watching that trailer, even, and I'm sure you guys noticed this, do you see her movement in the game? She's like bounding around like a gazelle
Right.
in that. That's not how she moves in the final game.
Ooh,
Oh,
so old
interesting.
animation on display.
Yeah, it was like alpha animation for their trailer. In the final game, she's walking very determinedly, but she's dragging the transistor behind her
Right,
on the
and
ground.
it's constantly sparking as
it's
it drags.
mostly. I think that's mostly because the guy got motion sickness, just being swung around on that sword all the time. So it's like, I will drag you as slow and stable as possible, so you don't barf on me somehow.
It's incredible to see the difference. The gazelle motions look so weird,
Well, and
like
it almost feels like a little odd for the mood of
Yeah.
the storyline. It doesn't. The overall plot line for where this game is doesn't feel like a game where the main character would be like happily dancing around, carrying this.
Oh yeah. So they
You can
capture
trigger
that so well.
flourish, but that's the only time that she's like jumping and things like
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So so we're totally going to spoil this game, and it needs to be spoiled because this game is obtuse. It's hard to understand. They don't tell the story.
And in all fairness, I haven't finished it and still don't understand it yet.
Yeah.
So yeah, but I'm ready to talk about it.
I mean, when you tease this, the last time we talked, I'll be honest, there's and I don't do research on these games prior to. I'm literally like, whatever we're playing next, I'll go buy it and download it. I know nothing about it other than what
trust
you say.
In your sommelier.
I'm a blind follower, maybe I should say. And
you will drink what I serve you.
What is this you said? Okay, motor oil. I can handle it. No,
that's Soma where they were drinking that.
Oh, too soon. That game still haunts me.
No.
No, but when you're talking about there was a guy. Well, I guess this might be on spoiler territory. So if you haven't played till now, just we're gonna start talking about spoilers.
Do it.
But when you find out that this guy has been impaled by the sword and is now inside of the sword, I was like, Ryan, what are we playing? This halfway sounds cuckoo. I don't quite know how much sense this is going to make and if I will enjoy it. And I couldn't be more wrong. I loved it. I just loved it. But what a crazy cuckoo idea. And Justin, yeah, you're right. Even when you get pretty far into the game, it doesn't make sense. It's not quite a linear storytelling experience. So you sort of feel confused through most of it. But they do weave it together very well. At that point, though, it is such a strange experience to be carrying around a sword that is talking to you the entire time.
Yeah.
How often is a weapon personified, like quite literally? It's crazy.
So here's the big setup, right? You are playing as Red, who is a singer in Cloudbank, and she is beloved. She's very accomplished. Everyone is attracted to her songs, and her songs themselves are pretty off-putting. They have been labeled as controversial because they act in a kind of like prophetic voice against the very city that she lives in.
Like a lot of Eminem songs.
There you go. And so she falls under attack by like an elite group known as the Camerata. And they are kind of a de facto mob that is trying to take over the city. And there's 4 members to them. And they come and they attack her with this weapon called the Transistor. And what they're trying to do is murder her and steal her soul or her trace, as the game puts it. And if they achieve that, then they get more or less her unique powers in the society. Her
Like her essence.
Yeah, and what that essence is doing to the city, which is like attracting followers and drawing people into her lyrics and ideas. And so they're trying to steal that voice. And it goes suddenly wrong when this man who has no history, no real information is available about him, except that he has been in a relationship with Red, and he's been acting somewhat as her lover or her bodyguard. He steps in front of the blade, takes the impact, and he is sucked into the transistor. And due to the proximity of the attack, Red also loses her voice. She saves her life, but she loses her voice. So you're in this weird scenario where you're controlling Red. Red doesn't have an ability to speak, but the sword, the man who died, is constantly speaking to her and also trying to interpret her motives as she goes through the game, which is a kind of interesting narrative choice and development in the game, because he is recommending certain actions, and then as Red goes through the game, she's making often a different choice, and he's having to interpret what that means, because she's certainly not explaining herself. So instead of running from the Camerata, she decides to go confront them. Instead of fleeing from the process, which is this weird robotic, seemingly artificial intelligence that's like taking over the city, she's going to fight them. And that's the setup for the game.
Yeah, it's an interesting storytelling piece, because you as the player are kind of going on the journey alongside them, and you often, as players, you rely on the dialogue, or you can kind of pick and tell what your character's motives are. But in this scenario, I found, at least for me, I was learning her motives almost as much as he was throughout the game.
Totally.
Because he's the only one who's talking, and in many cases is the kind of the voice of reason, no pun intended. He's very much just, realistically, we could skip town and get out of here, or, what are you doing? What are you trying to do? And it's funny because you don't really think about the dynamic of two protagonists, one without a voice and one with a voice, but no body. It's a wild offset and a unique pairing. And I found it very unique in that sense, because I felt a lot like him at times. I'm like, I'm controlling her, but I'm kind of forced into this pathway to reveal the storyline. But there's many times where you're sitting there thinking, like, dude, what is she doing?
That's such a good point. You're kind of controlling the two of them in that you're wielding the sword.
Right.
And the sword's motivations he makes known, and of course your motivations as a player, proceed through level, attack the bad guys, win, that kind of thing. But her motivations are hidden, and you're not allowed to influence them. Basically, she's going to complete her arc, and her arc is predetermined by her alone. So this is not one of those open world games where you control the character and you make her become who you think she should be. Rather, you are a witness to it, like the sword is. And that's really significant in this game that, could have been, I guess, critiqued for stealing a woman's voice, right? But instead, like, the whole point is that she is given the agency of her actions, and she doesn't even need a voice to do it. She lets her voice be known through her decisions through the game.
Yeah. One unique element that I found out is exclusive to PlayStation, or at least it was at some point, is that you can choose for the voice of the sword to come from your controller instead of the television. And so
that's really interesting.
Super interesting. It's a little more immersive and kind of gives you a similar experience to what Red is going through, we're just talking about and parsing that aside, but your controller is talking to you as the sword would. And that is an absolute kick. So
did you play it that way?
About that. I haven't yet. I was just reading about that. So I will play the second half of the game that way.
Nice.
As long as my son isn't asleep next to me.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Talking out of that thing. Yeah. One of the things that they did make good use of is they have these little random terminal computers staged throughout the game,
Yeah.
And that can kind of give you little clues and insights to what the world is like. And some of them, it's like, hey, you could place an order for food here. Or some of it is like a terminal with like a message warning to the city as the process is slowly taking over. And in almost all cases, you can have a response back. And many of them, Red will actually type something out as a response. And it's one of the few times where you actually get to
It's
hear
true.
her voice in some sense just through text, but it just gives you like a little bit more of a glimpse into her character without actually ever hearing her voice.
She does that iPhone thing where she's like typing and then erasing.
It erases. It's very interactive. It feels live. Like it doesn't feel like a canned enter. It's neat to see it type in and delete and go back, and they made really good use of that.
It gives you a sense for how she's self-censoring as well. Perhaps some of the editing of herself that she's had to do for her society, and you get the rebellious core that kind of sits in her that's been being expressed through her music, through that intermediary. And so there's an aspect of this game that just feels like her journey with the transistor, confronting the Camerata and using it, and witnessing the city get remade in the Camerata's image is a bit like her witnessing her own prophecies come to pass, and then like her own speaking against it, like living out the things she's always wanted to do through her music.
Yeah. One of the things that I loved about this game was that you guys can see I've got some board games up on my, left. A lot of it felt like a board game to me, where you are kind of placed in the center of a situation and you're choosing when to attack and how to attack, and you can kind of play like a third-person shooter where you sort of run and gun and just hack and slash and swipe at everybody. But then there is that function of freezing time and planning out your move, and then being able to attack so many people with such efficiency. So this screenshot is an example of kind of being able to see her trail and some of the effects of what she has chosen to do in that moment. And I thought that was so cool. Now, you guys will have to let me know, again, before we started doing this, I did not play too many video games. Is this at all a common dynamic? Is this like a genre of games, or is this pretty unique to Transistor?
Ryan, you're going to have much more of a broad background, but for certain RPGs that I have played, and some of the more immediate ones that come to mind are the traditional ones like Final Fantasy, right? So they have points where it's your turn, and it'll be like a turn-based component, but you can still plan your attack out. But in doing so, there's not a hack and slash function. And so that was one of the most unique dynamics for me, because I have not played an RPG game in so long. So my gut reaction in this is to just fire stuff and run and dodge and do it all in real time. And I had to kind of teach myself again to say, no, you can do this in a more efficient and tactical way and cause more damage and, fight more efficiently. So, but the fact that they gave me the ability to choose, and you can do either one, it may be harder to do it from a live, hack and slash kind of deal, but you can do it. I just thought that was so cool that they made the game sort of open and dynamic enough that you can make a free decision on how you want to approach it. But I'm not sure if I could speak to how normal that is for a lot of games.
So the game that would be contemporary to this, or perhaps even just before it, that was doing this was Fallout 3 with the VAT system. So you could have normal real-time gunplay, or you could more or less pause time and enter into, take a turn that was like simultaneous, and you could often, execute a number of actions within, your certain allotted time, and those would all execute before the enemy had a chance to react.
Right. And so hopefully the enemy would dissolve, or the mysterious stranger would come in.
Exactly. And save your bacon. And that's so that's what this game is doing. And so I wouldn't say that like innovated this, but from the studio's perspective, they were doing they did a hack and slash game before this called Bastion, and that game was a lot of fun. And I think that they wanted to, develop the complexity. So what this game I think really does innovate on is in what they call the functions, right, of the transistor. Your sword gains special abilities, and there's up to like 20 of them. And those special abilities are not only like ways in which the sword is used, but they're also can be stacked on top of each other to add like special effects to other abilities. So these like combinations end up producing, and there's 20 times 20 of them.
Yeah,
there's like 400 combinations.
It feels infinite for the size of like the scale of this game and world. That amount of combination feels much bigger than the whole entire game in itself.
And there may even be 8,000 of them, because you can actually stack two of those functions on top of one, and then their combinations all work together.
And have up to 4 passive ones running at the same time.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think at the beginning of the game, I kind of found a combination that I loved, and it would have been really easy for me to just stick with that the entire time. But then I realized you have to put everything in the active, support, or passive to unlock more information about each character.
Right.
And so then it encourages you
it forces
to
you to
cycle things and try new things, not only just to, have fun and see what will happen, but to also dive more into the world and the lore and the characters. And I think, Jimmy, you had said to me at one point, like, this game does not explain to you anything about what you need to do, and it just throws you in. And it totally did. I think the only real moment that I felt like I was in a tutorial, other than when it was just saying, hey, press this button to do this thing at the very beginning, was when right at the beginning you come up to a gate that you can't pass, and you have to realize, oh, my actions happen simultaneously when I'm in that planning mode. But then past that, it's on you. Go for it.
Right.
It's so funny you say this. So I wanted to talk about this briefly because I had this horrible gaffe. There is a point later in the game where you're encountering several really challenging foes. And like you, Justin, I didn't learn it probably until halfway through the game, that in order to unlock more information on the characters, you're encouraged to kind of like pick and choose how and where you're going to use these functions.
Right.
And oh, by the way, you're only allotted, X amount ability to use them. So some of them stay on the bench, if you will, which is really frustrating because you're like, oh, I want to use all of them. And
I want my Digidog right now.
So I have to tell you guys, I started to learn, I'm going to get creative and try these things. And I came up with a combination that was so poor. And I went into battle against these guys, and all 3 of them were like defensive moves, but I didn't know that. Like, I was kind of testing them out before I entered in, but I thought they were going to be causing active damage. The only move I had to cause damage was to summon that like dog to do your bidding.
Oh.
The rest of it was me just like trying to break down their defensive with like passive attacks and then waiting for the dog to do his deed. It took me like 20 minutes when it should have taken me 20 minutes. And I was so ticked off at myself, but it was hilarious. But in that, you don't get any kind of hints. You don't get any kind of suggestions. It's left up to you to sort of do trial and error and discover. And while there can be pain and frustration in that experience I had, there's also a lot of joy when you put something together like, oh, snap, I just found the nuclear bomb of attacks.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
So fun to discover it instead.
And the backdoor environment was so helpful for me. Because that was where I learned that there were combos in the game. And I don't know how you would have learned that otherwise, because it's like, hey, backstab and, and then that stream of light. I should have written all the names down, but just things.
Breach.
Yes. Things work together differently than if you were just doing it separately or in a different order. And that was really cool because I think it would have been really easy to just make the game, more straightforward, and just each attack is worth this many hit points. Do them however you want. So it was
Oh,
fun to discover at least that one. Have you guys discovered any more? Because I will totally use them.
Oh,
oh,
yeah.
I'm sure
There's some
I've got a
truly
bunch.
devastating ones.
Yeah, I'll give you the one that I use. It took 20 minutes to beat, like, kind of hard guys, but no, just kidding. No, what was also neat was, and I didn't make a whole lot of use of this, but what was cool is anytime you would, advance a level, they would give you a choice. So you can
Yep.
pick this component, or you can pick this component to use, or you can unlock more room, to have more functions, or you can open up a passive slot. They didn't give it to you all. You had to pick and choose, and I liked that. But the thing that I did not make a lot of use of, and I'm curious on a second playthrough how much I'll do, is they have a limiter function on the process. And so basically it makes the gameplay a little bit harder for you, but it rewards that difficulty by giving you more experience faster in the game. And I really didn't use, maybe more than like one of those just to help try and boost it. I'm curious if you guys did any of that, but I enjoyed the fact that it gave you, I don't know, I was making choices and decisions through it, and there was just a whole plethora of strategy to approach this game with. Kind of makes it feel like you can approach it many different ways and still have a great experience.
Yeah. At least for me, I've had all the limiters running the entire time. So I'm not sure
Wow.
if that's a good idea or not. But it has been
Wow.
a challenging game for me. So I'm curious
Yeah.
what the experience would be like. Uh, Defeating the spine felt significant to me because
Yeah.
I did not defeat it before. But I'm at like level 8 now, and I don't have a reference point for where you guys would be at the spine. So
I was probably maybe 6 or so at that point.
okay,
Maybe early 7.
so
Yeah,
it's
something like
doing
that.
some service. So
Yeah,
that's
no,
good.
you're definitely a higher at a fat. You've gotten to that level faster by using those, I'm sure.
Transistor is just so interesting because, the effect of applying the limiters is in some ways merely just changing the difficulty of the game because there are no difficulty levels.
Easy, medium, hard,
Right.
limiters.
And so what kind of difficulty do you enjoy as a player? And so you can toggle those limiters to basically customize your difficulty level, and it gives you a little reward, and it is little. It's, tiny percentage points on your experience total.
4% here,
Right.
whatever.
So those are nice, but my experience playing was more for the story, and I enjoyed like the puzzling element of trying to figure out which combinations were effective, and then you come up with a truly bad combination and you're like, well, this is for that little collectible story bit. Then I'll never go back to doing that ever again.
So stupid. I wasted this,
Exactly. And so this game, in some ways, it's very exploratory, and the developers, I don't think had. I think they had a lot of ideas that they were throwing at this game, and they didn't like go with them merely because they thought they were the perfect solution to this. But they went with them because they were like, we think that's cool, and we should just explore all the possibilities of that. We'll do the limiters, and we'll do all like these 20 different abilities, and we'll stack those abilities on top of each other and look at all the combinations that results from that. And that was very interesting to them as they developed it. And they're like, why don't we let the musician write like 5 or 6 lyric songs, and we'll have our singers sing them, and those will be a cool narrative element to this, and we'll have a writer write these stories of these people who get abducted. Now all of this stuff is in some ways like tangential to the experience. It's like not a core part of the plot, but on the other hand, they are what the game is. The game is like a collection of stories and ideas, and how you piece them together, how you kind of thread the needle of that is in some ways incumbent on you as a player to like do, because they don't ever do that work for you.
There was something I noticed, and it probably was more reflective to me on my style of playing a game, and it came out in the form of the narration. So the guys, the sword that is speaking to you. I don't know if you noticed this, but that voice will continue to speak even at times where you feel like, oh, the game would be paused, like, or if I access a terminal, like he keeps talking. And usually in a game, if you were to access a computer or start a function, it would halt whatever audio is going on, pause the
Right.
outside world, you're in this, and then when you come back out, that would resume. But instead, the voice continued to carry. And then there would even be times where his voice would take long pauses in between thoughts and then continue to speak. And I found that interesting because what it did for me is it made me sort of slow down my experience because I didn't want to miss anything he was saying. I didn't want to click a button and accidentally go through the
Right.
door if he wasn't done talking. And so it sort of
Right.
forces me to slow my pace a little bit, pause and pay attention to. I mean, his voice, it's very prominent, but what it's also doing on a different scale is, hey, pay attention to the other details too, right? Don't just pay attention to his voice, but maybe apply that same thought process to the whole experience. Take a look at the posters on the wall. Look at the world and the surroundings. Pay attention to the music and the whole mood and environment and feeling of this game is so it's so weird to me how to say this. It's like it's very gloomy feeling and yet vibrant in its colors. I mean, it is.
Yeah.
This game is gorgeous. It just pops on your screen. But it is really it was a good reminder for me to try and pull in the small details, pay attention to the little things to enhance and marinate that experience more so.
And like you were saying, when the sword spoke and how it spoke told little elements of the story, because when I was heading toward the spine, he started being not well for some reason. And I assumed the transistor, the sword, was broken or something was wrong in the hardware or
Right.
something. But then you go through a back door and he's fine.
Yeah.
And he even makes a comment like, oh, I feel better in here or something like that. And so it was just like, oh, it's not the sword, it's the environment he was in. So something was wrong with where we were for him, not just something being wrong for the sword. And yeah, so lots of details and lots of switching modes in different places.
So I'm curious, Jimmy, because you mentioned, not wanting to miss any of the narration, why you want to hear it all. What I find that's very unique about Supergiant's games and with this voice actor in particular, he is so very present, and his voice, it has all of this unspoken emotion in it. And so often it's what he's not saying, right? He has a lot of lines in the game that are something like, yeah, or wait, no. And it's like, what are you saying?
Yeah.
There's no actual content to it. It's just him expressing a relating, emotion in a moment of the game that you have to read all of that into, the subtext.
And it's so funny because we do that so often over. I mean, think of any other medium, right? Think of just a normal podcast where you can't see a person's face. You're only limited to their inflections, or be it a radio or anything of the sort. It's really not that different. But the fact that like I'm looking at a sword and hearing a voice, and I'm like, I can't see your face. I can't read what you're doing. But if I take a step back, like I consume that kind of stuff all day long. And you're right, there's so much packed into what he is saying or isn't saying, or the way he says something, or the way he pauses, or the length of his pauses. I mean, they did such a great job utilizing the dialect in all forms of it. And that was really fascinating because there are a lot of parts, right, where you're absolutely right. There's a lot of emotion and moments where you're like, there's more to you or history in this place, or something we don't know that's significant, and Red can't communicate to him, right? It's like a one-way street. She's only receiving what he is saying, as are we as the player. And so there's a lot that you sort of feel left like, what are you going to say? Why are you, wait, what? No, give me more. You kind of
Yeah.
feel like you're on the edge of your seat sometimes when he starts talking. It actually really starts to draw you in a lot of scenes.
And that's how I felt. I felt I wanted to listen to the sword because I wanted Red to hear it. It's like I didn't want to interrupt him.
Right.
He's expressing something caring for the main character. And if I just rush forward, then I'm like interrupting the ability of the main character to be cared for.
Right.
Yeah, that and so I'm trying to gauge whether I need to get on my soapbox now, right? Because because I had this revelation about the game this week as I was going back and revisiting it now. 7 years after it came out, right? Supergiant has made 2 more games since then. And what's really interesting about this game is I feel like it's the first game where they found their voice as a developer. And developers are artists too. And especially this one, they're not making games just iterating off of, the latest classic or, reskinning something that someone else has done. They are trying to create something new and something interesting and things that they find interesting as developers. And so they throw all of their artistic resources at it, and they came up with Transistor. And isn't it curious how Transistor is about a main character who loses her voice and is trying to find it in a world that's largely homogenized or in a world that is kind of fickle? And that could be used to describe games. And developers have a real challenge finding a voice in a marketplace that's, characterized by fickle, tendencies on the part of players. And, this kind of like big business perspective that would like to homogenize all games to become the perfect game that then sucks people in for 100 hours, right? And so here you have Cloud Bank and its, radical democracy, which is kind of reduced to this fickle thing. And you've got the Camerata, who is the mafia trying to control the world through the process. And the process is the process of making like the perfect world. And that's like, that seems like a one-to-one metaphor with game development and companies having to make games.
The other thing I thought you were going to say as I consider that is I almost think about the process of how I looked at the speed at which stuff begins to change in the game, and you could even look at that as a metaphor for how fast this industry just continues to rocket forward. So you could spend several years and pour your heart and soul into a game of sorts, and feel like you're being left in the dust with how quickly your environment and taste and themes and events and everything else around you is just more moving forward. That's really interesting. That's a great thought, though.
Yeah. And so go for it.
It's just interesting, the visuals that all of the you're saying homogenized. All of the villains have like the exact same color scheme. And in many ways, they're super sleek and cool, and
like Wally just beefed up.
Right, exactly, beefed up Wally. But then you bring this, kind of beautiful chaos and this different color palette. You as the characters stand out clearly from all the other residents of the game, which is helpful for the mechanics and the player and everything. But to your point, Rye, I think it is serving the storytelling that you are bringing color and life to this lifeless, homogenized place that, everything's working. Like all of the villains are, doing their role and everything, but they're all the same and they're all, kind of homogenized was just a really straightforward word.
Yeah. Red goes on this journey and you're not even sure what the journey is, right? It's kind of an odyssey for that reason. You don't know what her motivations are, but you know that she's supposed to do something, and so she faces the villains, and that's the most clear motivation through the whole game. And in some ways, I think of developers trying to make games, and at some point you're like, well, why are we in all this? What are we doing all this for? Well, we do know there are bad games out there and there need to be good ones. So let's face our villains. So Supergiant seemed to do that with this game, and they threw all their best ideas at it. And it came out, I think, the game feels a little rushed. It feels a little underdeveloped. Like perhaps the game could have used a couple hours more runtime where they explored, say, Sybil's rivalry with Red. That's all implied, and the collectible cards on the characters kind of tells some of that backstory. But what would it have been like if it had been shown a little bit more, and by the time we got to the boss battle with her, we felt a little bit more before we killed her.
Right, it would have mattered. She was just a bigger robot. I didn't care. Yeah.
Right. It would have been neat to just have like a 30-second dialogue scene that gave some color to like still imagery, because I think you get a couple of those during the game to recount an event or something like that. That would have been great to have like one for each character. It would have really brought you would have felt, I think, more connected to Cloud Bank, to that whole city, right? You would have started having people's names and faces and relationships, and suddenly you would have felt the impact of being in a lifeless city when you start to see the impact of all those lives that you usually do have.
So I think their confidence as a developer just is still growing at this stage, and so they're not making some of those choices. Now, they did focus in on their core story, which is okay. Like their core story is good and it's important, and I think they achieve it in the end. The fact that we lose some of these tangential stories is perhaps the biggest miss, and one of the reasons why I hope that someday they remaster this game or remake it, right, and tell the whole story. I think there's potentials here that were not realized, and you can feel that, I think, in retrospect or in playing back through it a second time. Now that you understand what's going on, you're no longer openly questioning the plot, but you're actually asking more of those story related questions, like what was Red's relationship with Sybil, and why did the Camerata start stealing souls, and what did they really hope to gain, or what was the sickness they saw in the city that made them motivated to pursue these ill-gotten ends. And all those questions just aren't given a lot of runtime in this. Instead, you're kind of running around the city. A lot of it is happening in environmental storytelling. You're getting to know different areas, and the sword is talking to you the whole time. So you're getting that relationship between Red and the man. That romantic relationship and the way in which he's constantly caring, but then her rebellious need to find her voice, forms that kind of core tension in the game. And they do tell a very focused story with that. And, Justin, you having been only now, just over halfway through the game, I'm not going to say any more on that, but awesome. We'll definitely cover that in the next episode, because it's what makes this game, I think, memorable and worth playing now 7 years later, when I think they've told more mature and more deep stories since.
So, right, one of the things that you brought to both of our attention was the songs and their lyrics and their significance to the world and the story. I kind of want you to talk about that, because we haven't even talked about that offline yet.
Oh, yeah. So pull up We Become One, which we heard in the trailer. So it's curious because Red is a singer, and her songs actually show up in the game at random times, either in flashbacks or in she's like humming songs when you're in certain modes in the game. And these, what's so interesting to these lyrics is that some of them relate to the game, and others of them don't connect very directly, and so you're left to like make those links. I think this song connects most directly more than any of them. So I'll just go ahead and like read it out loud, unless you want me to just play the song. I can always do that too.
We can try that.
Yeah, here, I'll play it.
As long as that's not like a copyright issue, but I don't know who would find it.
It probably is, but
probably is. But we give all the credit, and we're not making any money.
We're making so much, right?
Right. If you want me to do an interpretive version of it, I'm happy to.
I'm gonna play this song so we don't have to listen to Jimmy sing it in Nick Cage's voice.
I thought Jimmy was gonna do an interpretive dance, which is still invited during the playing of the song.
All right, here we go.
When you speak, I hear silence. Every word a defiance. I can hear, I can hear. Think I'll go where it suits me. Moving out to the country of everyone, everyone. Before we all come one.
So good.
You tell yourself that you're lucky. Lying down never struck me as something fun, any fun. Staring pain for good feeling. Now your wounds never healing till you're numb. It's begun. Before we all come one. We all come we all become one. Oh, we all become one. Oh, we all become one. Stop breathing, start leaving before we all become
I could have hit that note. Just saying.
That's so good. The run line is the one that gets me every time. It's just so amazing. One word, and it breaks the meter, and it's just like run. It's, whew, yeah.
It's evocative,
It
and
is.
this isn't like, again, it's saying, don't lie down. We have to go. We have to stop grieving, start leaving. Like this is a really interesting song.
Yeah, this is where, and Ryan, I'm going to go back to what you were talking about earlier, which is I would have loved to have seen cutscenes or some kind of background or history of moments where the process is taking over. It would have been fascinating to see what it would look like to see the city being emptied in a hurry, or what's happening with that. And I know there are more than enough examples in movies and TV shows where you don't see the apocalypse happen. The
Right.
Walking Dead, for example, right? You just wake up with Rick Grimes and the world's gone to poop, and you were never privy to see how that happened. And that's always the kind of thing that I yearn to see. But as I hear that song, I kind of just think back to like, Yeah, what would the chaos have been like? As Cloud Bank went from normal life to where it is right now.
Yeah.
That would have been a fascinating thing to look at.
Yeah, Justin, put the lyrics back up. That line, moving out to the country, is something we haven't talked about yet, and it's a really core theme in this game, and it serves a dual purpose. So the city of Cloudbank is where all this happens, and the city is very interconnected. Everyone has a voice in, the management of the city, because it's like a radical democracy. They're using those terminals to determine whether the sky should, be
Right.
cloudy or clear, raining or snowing, that kind of thing, whether they should build a bridge or invent some other architectural feature. And she here is speaking against this. So there's a lot of these contrasts here. When you speak, I hear silence, every word a defiance. And she says she can hear. And then she talks about not staying in the city, but moving out to the country. And this is an idiom in the game for like leaving the city or leaving civilization or the technology itself. Moving out to the country is like a mythical place. It also refers to the afterlife, the place you go to when you die. And that's a weird thing to include in a song. Like, I'm going to go to the place where we want to go when we die. And with everyone, before we all become one. And it's this idea that by kind of enduring in the city and in the cycle of it, we are homogenizing ourselves. It's this irony, right? Because everyone seems to have a voice, but then their voices, as the camerata observes in the game, are kind of following the cyclical pattern and don't seem to ever be breaking out of it. And so she's recognizing this as an artist and trying to speak to this. Now, this lyric actually happens in the game during that flashback when you see the man impaled.
Okay.
The whole song actually is sung. And that line, stabbing pain for the feeling, now your wounds never healing, is a pretty blatant reference to the guy getting impaled.
Oh, right. That's what. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can I just say, this sword looks like it would be the most uncomfortable sword to be stabbed with. This thing looks like you would be getting stabbed with like a giant USB stick. It doesn't look sharp. The end of it looks like a brunt. Like it would be so painful.
So their merch, they actually have a USB stick that is this sword.
Yes,
I know. Awesome. They've got the best merch.
Supergiant. So awesome.
I'm plugging their merch now.
A pin that was made of this, and the little like light blue streaks and circles glow in the dark.
Oh, that's little things like that. Just I loved it. It's like as the sword is dragging, it almost looks like there's sparks, kind of, but all the little glowing lines come out in these like linear sort of fashion, on the ground as you're dragging it. It's just a sort of like super small details that just really popped to me.
She is wearing his coat.
I never picked that up.
Pick it up.
And it seems like in that scene when she's singing, when we get to that flashback, she's in a full gown. And so I feel like she ripped off part of her gown to be able to fight after that happened.
Yeah.
We don't see that moment happening, but her costume is different after that.
Yeah, her character definitely feels like she has seen some stuff, and she is not the person she once was. She is ready to whoop some tail.
Well, she's cradling that sword there, right? And it's not because she likes weapons. It's because her beloved's in the sword. And I'll be honest, even after replaying this game, 3 or 4 times, I still miss that. I still don't quite get it enough that, you know, the sword is precious to her because the man is precious to her. We're given almost none of their backstory, and so we have to fill it in our own heads. But she will not let go of that sword, and he is constantly thanking her for, you know, keeping him, bringing him, giving him a lift, you know, as he says a few times jokingly. But it's in part because, like, he doesn't want to be away from her either.
Well, and it's so funny you say that because she can't talk, and we don't get a lot of backstory. So a lot of times it felt to me like the guy was more in love with her than maybe she was to him. But that's strictly because you just get no dialogue. So the only way she can show it is, as you say, to hug and hold onto that sword.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's interesting you say that, because I guess I knew that, but I don't. I haven't thought about it to that extent, because it feels very one way in the game from the guy's voice talking to her, and that's strictly because she just can't talk. It would be wrong for us to assume otherwise.
And it's weird, you know, like he was a guy and now he's a voice and a sword. You know, how do you love a voice and a sword?
Right. That's why I said when you described this game, I was like, Ryan's lost his rocker. I mean, he's straight up falling out of the chair.
It's bizarre.
I think it's really poetic, right? That she takes this moment that is clearly grief. Her head's down, her eyes are closed. She's touching his coat. And then we see her in this, where her eyes are open. She's, you know, she's determined. And she is cradling the sword, but so she's using her grief and wielding her, you know, injury and the guy that was killed, you know, so just the weapon itself becomes this really interesting metaphor for her beloved, but also her grief, and then just totally sticking it to the man. Like, I'm using your own sword to defeat you. It's just it's multi-layered kind of visual storytelling.
Yeah, it's all of that. Oh.
And I have more of it to experience. I
Yeah.
have more of it to look forward to.
Yeah. This well, I wanted to say this earlier, and it hadn't really fit into any other parts of our conversation, but one thing I love about games, I tend to like open world games because I like a free exploration. They're often big, but because of that, they can be so overwhelming. And this game took the concept of getting different combinations of, you know, weapon modules and attack schemes and tactics, and that combination brought an open world element to a game that is not open world. So I loved that. It felt like a digestible version of an open world game. I had a plethora of variations to experiment with. I've started the replay of the game, and when you beat it, you can play it back with all of the progress that you have made. So you get to keep what you've made and continue to earn more. And the different bad guys that pop up at different sequences are different. And so you get a little bit of a different experience, but you still get more and more time to play with those variations and combinations. So it feels like it doesn't feel overwhelming. Like, oh, I have to explore this whole map and collect every artifact and explore and talk to everybody and spend 200 hours.
Oh yeah.
I can do this again and get the same joy and satisfaction of playing with that huge open combination rack right there. That part has been a very satisfying piece. And I wanted to say that earlier, just didn't time to talk about during the
When you know what you're doing, it takes like 3 hours to play, or maybe even a little bit less, but it's not very long game. And that contributes to that almost music video like feel. You know, you're going through the motions of these these images that have all of these layers of meaning, but they're totally being unexplored. Like you're just like living in the moment, you know, a little blip there, a little blip there. And And we didn't even touch on the fact that all of the functions of the sword relate to actual people.
Right.
So, Crash, which is one of your first abilities, and Breach are related to Red and the Man. And their functions to, Red's voice made people vulnerable, made people reflect and think about, what they were supposed to be doing with their lives. And her sword attack, Crash, causes the process to freeze and become vulnerable. And so, in this sense, her personality, her unique, contribution to Cloudbank in the city is what is instantiated then in the Transistor. And that's true with all the characters and all their abilities. And I think there's 20 of these characters.
Wow.
It's really interesting how they turned even the attacks of the game into metaphors to think about.
Yeah,
And I
cool.
respect them for that. It's a really ambitious idea, and that it wasn't fully realized, I can kind of forgive them for it. We see them as a young indie studio trying stuff, and honestly, like, it set them on their course. I look at Pyre, their third game, and Hades, their fourth, and I see the seeds of both of those games in this one. And I think they only were able to make those games because they made Transistor and experimented and decided, we're gonna find our voice as a studio and pursue it.
And
Yeah.
I would love to hear from you guys, maybe next time, what you think your program would be if you became a trace in the Transistor.
Classic.
And I literally, I know what my active, passive, and supporting role would be. So, no pressure, but I want you guys to put a
Stomach
little thought into
gas.
that.
They would just stop and defecate themselves, expel their parts.
You'd take their face off.
Swap face for ultimate confusion.
Face
White
off.
dogs come out.
Oh my gosh.
Oh man. Ridiculous.
That's a good question. That's hard to know about oneself.
Yes. It'll be. Oh, and I think I took it a little light. It wasn't.
Okay.
It wasn't only super deep, but I think I found something that feels congruent with me. So we should explore that next time.
Next time. And there will be a next time, 2 weeks from now. Transistor discussion 2, discuss the ending, discuss the process and the camarada and their goals.
And when I have the context and knowledge that you guys have. So it'll be great.
Yeah. And then we're going to make the ultimate decision about whether we're going to continue with Supergiant Games or we're going to do something totally different again. Yep.
I'm excited.
If any of you listeners want to weigh in on that, write a comment.
Hellblade being one of the potential future games, and I'm playing Assassin's Creed Valhalla right now, so I feel like I'm ramping into that experience. So, yeah. Well, as always, great being with you guys. Thanks for tuning in and listening to Videogame Sommelier, and we will be back to conclude our Transistor conversation in 2 weeks.
Rock and roll.
Have a great President's Day and Valentine's Day, guys.
Yeah, will do.
What happened to him?
He
got transisted. Is that a thing?
He went into the sword.